Okay, so we've got a scenario. Thanks again for joining. And we've got a scenario queued up where this is in the Radian ENGIE staging environment. So this is not your production data, but we have a scenario that's we're going to replicate what occurred in production to show you how to avoid that. And so in this instance, there is an executed UID, and there are annual recurring development fees, and the first 2 years have been paid, and then there's an open payment obligation that's due in October. That was kind of time travel a little bit to go back in time to recreate how this happened. And in this instance, there were two amendments that were executed in um, in the same year, which is a little unusual, I think, for two amendments to go through
Yes.
within the same year. So a little bit of an edge case, but still worth looking into. I think kind of illustrates some of the things that you need to pay attention to when you execute an amendment. And so this is the original, and then let me just refresh here and make sure I got most recent data. And so I'm going to push through a amendment, and we'll say it's a TNC amendment, and this is amendment number 1. And we'll just get this going through the various steps, and then paralegal makes it available. We'll just use the same terms. And it goes out to LO. And then it comes back in. And we're just getting to execute it. And here we go. Okay, so this is amendment number 1. And so let's say that this was being signed. I can't remember the exact dates here, but let's say it was going to be in September. So this payment is going to be due in October. And so we'll say, oh, we're going to start the payments in September 17th. There we go.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just really quick, because it's an amendment. So are you basing it on the original date, or are you giving it a new date?
So typically amendments, this is the development period effective date. Typically an amendment is not going to change the development period effective date unless it's like an A&R.
So that's
amendment.
the original, based on the original agreement there?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Right. So this is like this screen when executing an amendment can be a little bit tricky. There's a lot of different inputs. So let's just do a quick review. The first one is the amendment effective date. This is the date the amendment was signed or became effective, countersigned really to become effective. So landowner signs it, then ENGIE signs it. That is the date of the countersign. The amendment becomes effective on that date. You're always in ENGIE's use case, when you're executing an amendment, you are always going to supersede the prior agreement. You select that here. When you select the agreement that's being superseded, the prior agreement, this checkbox is going to pop up. And so this is what we were just talking about. So unless it's an amend and restate, which is somewhat unusual. So for most amendments, the amendment will always use the same original development period effective date. That date doesn't change just because there's an amendment. And so by default, this is automatically checked. if it happened to be an A and R, you would have the ability, you could uncheck this and you'd have to capture a distinct, or you'd have to change this date. But by default, it's selected, so it's going to automatically copy that over for you. And then there is the start amendment payment date. And so this indicates when you want to start payments based off of the amendment. And I guess just for reference on this call, we've also queued up a scenario where Kathy would have a payment on hold, and she's waiting for an amendment to go through. So show you what that looks like in a moment. But in this example, this amendment, we're going to say the payments are going to start on 9/17. That's the date that the amendment was signed, and we hit submit.
Okay, so just for clarification, when you say start, you mean they can go ahead, but they're not going to be, the due date's going to be marked with the original date.
Right. So the amendment, we can look at that here.
So you're just going ahead and making sure the amendment is locked and loaded to proceed with payments.
Correct. The payment start date here is so on the prior agreement, we can see the effective date was 10/28/2022. The amendment, this is the amendment information up here. So UIT amendment number 1 is now executed. The amendment is effective 9/17. The payment start date, that's just saying from this date forward, payments are going to be based off of the amendment. But it's not changing the due date of the payment. It's not changing the scheduling of payments. Payments are still going to be based off of the anniversary of this date, which is 10/28.
Right. I think it's confusing though, and I think that might be some of the problem that people have when they're shifting these, when they're executing these.
I guess my question, that'll make sense to me. And if anything, I was like in kind of like assembly line, just trying to get these amendments, because I know that I'm going to come across this again, just because of the massive campaign of all the new moon amendments of basically everyone having TNC amendments sent out to them. So I was under the impression that I always selected the payment start date as the date of the effective date of the amendment. So I would just, I just want to make sure I hope once we get to the point of seeing an example where the payment start date does not equal the effective date, that's where I just want to make sure that I'm understanding why.
Yeah.
And
so,
how.
Right. So just to flag, if it was always the same date, we would not provide you the option to put in a different date. So there is a decision that needs to be made there, and I'll show you the information that you'll need to look at in order to make the correct decision about what date to put in there. So now let's say, let's just take a look at our payment obligations. And here we go. So here's the 10/28/2024 payment. And so let's say that this now gets paid. And for the purposes of just moving quickly here, I'm going to do this a way that is not how payments really get paid. I'm just going to kind of quickly. Normally payments get paid in Payment Manager, but for the purposes of moving quickly, I'll just do it this way. And so this 2024 payment has now been paid. And now let's say there's another amendment is going through, and let's just say that this was the last one was on September, and there was an October payment. So let's say like in the middle of October, there's a payment, another amendment is going through. So like a month after the previous amendment got signed, we're ending up with amendment number 2. And it got requested on 10/15. Let's just say We're going to move it forward through the workflow. And so our anniversary date is 10/28. And let's say that this is going to get executed slightly before that. So like 10/20, 2024. We're going to supersede the prior agreement. And now, so here's what you need to look out for, Nora, is that you're going to execute this. Is the amendment effective date is 10/20. And so you put in 10/20 here, you're selecting this prior agreement, and then, but this is showing you what the original development period effective date is. So you can look at the anniversary date here is October 28th. So you're executing this amendment just a few days before the anniversary of this. Well, Kathy makes her payments 45 to 60 days in advance. So the payment, there's a payment here, like, you know, if these are annual payments, there's going to be a payment due in 8 days. Well, Kathy probably already made that payment because she makes her payments way in advance of just 8 days. So if you're in that 45 to 60 day window of executing an amendment, that's like a little bit of a flag to say, okay, I need to go check and see if Kathy already made this year's payment, because she makes her payments a month and a half to 2 months in advance. So I'm just going to back out of here and just click outside of this light box and anywhere in the gray area. And I'm going to go to compliance. By default, this is only showing me active payments. So I need to open up this filter and do show active and complete. So I want to see the payment history here. And here I see that the payment due 10/28 is already complete. So this shows me that the 2024 payment was already made. So I'm not expecting another payment until next year. So when in this instance where we have two amendments that got executed kind of close to each other within this sort of time frame that we're talking about that can be problematic, I know that I'm not expecting any payments until after 10/28/2024. So when I execute amendment number 2, I need to put in a date that, like, I put in this date or the next day after that to say, okay, prior to this date, I don't want there to be any payments that get generated from this amendment. So that's part of executing agreements or executing amendments. You need to recognize that you are ceding the payment obligations in doing that. So especially for amendments, you need to be aware of the payment history of what is happening.
Yeah, and I think especially with and that makes sense to me, especially regarding like the anniversary dates and the payments being due 45 to 60 days before, or not being due, but being paid before the due date. I think, and I have like a real an example that I would need help on after we go through these scenarios. But basically, I think one of the things that I wasn't quite understanding, but I think I do now, is that one of the amendments that was done over this past summer for a lot of the new moon agreements had their amendment, basically their payment due within, I think, like 45 days of that amendment effective date. So not having to do with the anniversary date. So it's confusing to see, like, okay, all of these dates are like on the exact same, all these payments are the exact same date for the past 5 years. And then all of a sudden there's this random payment in the middle, like some other month and just trying to figure out. So Kathy and I actually looked at one together, and it was also confusing because the payment amounts were changing, and I just couldn't quite line up which payment was for which year and when to click the start date. So I do have an example of that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah,
Okay.
And yeah, recognizing that in this scenario, we're not using that sort of offset based off of the amendment effective date, but that is that's an excellent point in that. So if we're going to use the 10/20 date here, and we're superseding this. Typically, payments are based off of the anniversary date of the development period effective date. But you're right, it is possible that, or there are lots of instances where an amendment has a payment that's going to be scheduled off of this date here, the amendment effective date. And so, yes, that can add an additional layer of complexity to the scenario. So in this instance, what we want to do is we're going to say, I don't want there to be any payments. Payments prior to this date are not created. So I can should be able to put in 10/28 here and hit submit. So I'm saying this date and going backwards, I don't want the amendment to generate any payments. And we'll give the system, we'll just update this to superseded. We'll just give that a moment to update. There we go. Okay, so Amendment 2 is executed and Amendment 1 is superseded, and the original is also superseded. And now when we go to look at compliance, and I'll give this a refresh, and maybe I did this incorrectly. All right, so apologies. Let's make, I needed to put in 10/29 here. So I was wondering exactly how this would work. So saying 10/28 was still a valid date. So let's just try this one more time. And I'll do executed, and now I'll do 10/29/2024. I needed to do 1 day after. And we'll just give this a moment to generate payments. And there we go. And so now, since we used the 10/29 cutoff, and so we can see, open up active and complete again. And so now we see our payment string here. So every year there's a payment due, and the 2024 payment is complete. And now our amendment has generated payments from 10/29/2024 going forward.
Okay, so like a day after the anniversary date to to avoid that that payment. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
And okay, so that takes care of that. We can flip to another scenario here. This is where Kathy has payments on hold. And then also would be happy to look at sounds like you might have some live data that we can look at. Okay, so in this instance, there's, let me see what's going on with the payments here. So, and we can look at complete. We can also look at hold.
So, Clay, real quick, just so I'm taking notes. Do you suggest that part of my workflow be basically in compliance, always going to the filter to show all hold, draft, completed, active, just to get like a full sense of what? I think that's what was missing for me before, is that I wasn't seeing what had already been done, or even like this scenario, something being on hold.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the big flag that for me is that when you are in that 45 to 60 day window of the anniversary date, and you're going to see that when you go to execute the amendment. And so, in the interest of not burdening you with, every time you go to execute an amendment, you need to look at this. If there's something tricky, you might want to, but the flag for you is that 45 to 60 day window. I'll show you another flag here. So both of these flags are going to occur in the same light box where you're executing the amendment. So you don't necessarily need to go click somewhere else to double check. Having said that, if you are executing an amendment like a new moon and you just recognize that new moon is a little tricky and there's all these the TNC amendments, it might be worthwhile to take a look before you do so. To me, I think it almost makes more sense to double check after you execute to look and see what happens with the payments afterwards, and to make sure that they look good after you execute.
Okay, and that's
yep.
been part of the workflow is to wait, kind of refresh and wait for the compliance tab to pop up and make sure that future payments look good.
Yeah.
But I think, to me, not cross-referencing those future payments against past or on hold or anything, or recently made payments is where I think you mentioned 2 instances in which me pushing things through created duplicate payments, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around about what I should have been looking at. So, but I that makes sense. I think just personally for New Moon, just because it has been such a little bit of a nightmare, that I will be paying close attention to this, and especially because of the volume.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And so just setting up our example here, there's a 2023 payment that's already complete. Just in our scenario, we kind of changed the amounts here, but let's say that Kathy put December 1st payment on hold for 2024, and then we see 2025 going forward. And so, Nora, you have amendment number 1 is ready to be executed here. And so you're going to go to executed, and let's just say you're executing this today. And so this got signed today, and we're going to supersede the prior agreement. And typically, you're going to select the same date as the amendment effective date. And then when you do that, the system flags this payment that's on hold. So this is saying there's a past due item on the preceding agreement, and here's the information, and it's on status hold. And so we see this a lot as well. And so Kathy has placed this payment on hold, and she's waiting for the amendment to go through to make the payment. But the amendment took a little bit of time to get executed, and it hasn't gotten executed until, well, this payment is already past due at this point. But so that's the purpose of putting it on hold. And so here you would confirm with Kathy, and you would let her know, oh, I'm about to execute this amendment, and I see that you have this payment on hold. And then she would confirm and say, yes, I put this payment on hold, is waiting for new payees to sign an owner change or something like that. And I was waiting for that amendment. And so then Kathy will take this payment and she'll take it off of hold. And so I'll show you that payment manager. And this is our hold scenario. And so here's where Kathy captures a rationale and description and say, oh, it's pending the amendment. It's the new payee. And so Kathy takes this off of hold. And then if we were to refresh here, and she'll let you know, okay, I took the payment off of hold. You can execute. And so now when you execute on today's date, the system says, okay, this is now the payment's active. So in this instance, when we execute the amendment, we want the payments from the amendment to start at this prior date at the beginning of December. So even though the amendment was assigned today, this payment from the beginning of December, we want the amendment to recreate, to update that payment to the new payees. And so you can just click this button here. I would say change the amendment start date. And then it just changes it to December 1st. And so this is an instance where this date does not match this date. And we can hit submit. And we'll give this a moment to update. There we go. And we can take a moment for the compliance items to generate. And here we have our 12/1 payment. And then this is where you could look at active and complete. We could also select hold just for good measure. There's not going to be anything on hold. And so here we can see the payment history. This wasn't the best example in that I didn't actually apply an owner change to be able to see that payments were previously going to somebody else. But that is the concept for when payments are on hold.
Okay, cool. So that makes sense that the start payment date is one that's going to be before the effective date.
Right.
And that's to capture something that hasn't been paid yet that needs to get paid.
Right. And
Got
so
it. Okay.
also in this instance, there's like an on-screen alert when you're executing in the same light box of when you're executing the amendment. There's some indication to you of, this is a special instance, or, there extra steps are required. So in this case, the system will alert you that there were past due payments that are either on hold or, so you need to make a decision about when you're executing the amendment today, how do you want to handle those past due payments? Do you want the past due payments to be updated based off of the amendment that you're executing today? That's the decision that you're making there. The other scenario, the first one that we looked at, was where you might be executing within that 45-day window. Okay, do you have any questions, or do you have a scenario that you wanted us to look at?
If we could look at the scenario.
Yeah, for like something with like live data or something.
Yes.
Okay. And is this a new moon or?
It is new moon, yes. And the entity is Smith, Charles, and with an ampersand, and it should come up.
Here we go. Yep, I see that. Yep. Here we go. Right. And yeah, so you have an amendment that you're about to execute.
Yeah, so and I had emailed about this one because I'd had two questions. The first question was answered and it had to do with like a warning message that popped up, and you said, oh, that makes sense if the data in the amendment
I
or the
have to
terms
leave,
don't match.
sorry.
Okay, sounds good, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Doesn't match, but then I just still didn't know what start payment date to put. So the amendment that was already executed was executed on October 28th. And I guess my question is, I first, just because I was trying to like understand what all payments had already been made in compliance. It's basically, I have the Fourth Amendment in hand. It's the Third Amendment that I'm not sure if that was paid correctly, and I don't know if it'd be easier for me to share my screen or if
Hi, Nora. I'm actually looking at it right now. I see that the payments that were made were previously $600 each to each landowner, and then it updated to $500. Is that what you wanted to flag, the payment difference?
But more so, let me see, I can drop this screen. It's not the cutest screenshot. Sorry about my scraggly notes. So do you want me to drop it in the team chat?
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I was looking at a different payment, but that it was 1,200 and then it dropped to 1,000.
This.
Okay, so I just sent it and it has a whole bunch of silly looking markups on it.
Do we know why this 2025 payment was marked invalid, Sydney?
2025. Oh, sorry, I was looking at Nora's screenshot. Invalid.
Here's the comp ID.
Can you scroll over so I could look at the? Here we go. Invalid.
The comp ID is in the chat.
I'm looking at the agreement.
Yeah. So...
Okay, so these were crazy.
Yeah, I know that this is out of the norm. I just want to make sure that I don't mess anything up going forward, just because I have like a whole nother batch of like nearly 30 amendments that we just got signed today and I need to push through.
Yeah, so the difference in payment, so the drop, I think it's because actually
I know they did like a blanket.
Yet, but yeah, this happened with the agreement template you guys applied. There's the amendment that's executed right now, that one updated payment terms to the $1,200 per year, and then the template that gets applied with that, it's like named year 7+3 fix. That agreement template that was sent in is the wrong payment amount, so that drops it back down to the $1,000. And that's what I've been
so that's
working
gonna,
on other
agreements.
And then also there's a thing with the periods. So that also...
so yeah, just hold on for a second, Sydney. So Nora, what Sydney is talking about occurs earlier in the agreement workflow, where paralegal they're helping draft the amendment, and they, in Radian, in the workflow, paralegal is responsible for selecting which terms template gets applied to that request. And what Sydney is helping resolve, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sydney, is that paralegal selected the incorrect legal manager terms template for these amendments. And so the wrong payments are being generated as a result. And so there's some confusion for paralegal about which terms template to select for all of these amendment requests. And so this has happened across New Moon, where the wrong terms template was selected by paralegal.
Got it. Okay, and just so I'm understanding when that happened, are you talking about the TNC amendments that were done over for not this current Fourth Amendment, for example, for this landowner, but for the Third Amendment that happened, I don't have it pulled up, but like July or August or something like that. Was that when the incorrect one was chosen, or even more recently as of this October request that we're now getting to push through under Amendment number 4?
It's this amendment number 4. So
Got it.
you'll see
Okay.
that it's applied
But this occurred.
the
So Sarah Chaidez made this available back in October. This was on October 13th. Paralegal made this available. And it's at that step that paralegal selects the terms template. So that incorrect decision was, or that incorrect selection was made back on October 13th.
Okay, so I did upload the for this particular scenario, I did upload the scan of the agreement. Is it also the actual amendment itself that shouldn't have been sent to the landowner, or is it just what was selected in Radian that's incorrect?
Yeah, I think the issue is that the incorrect data was seeded or selected in Radian. So
because I know that their blanket solution, or at least what was trying to happen, was to get everyone on the same kind of pay schedule, and in this case, it goes basically the ones that I've marked in that screenshot with the 3 orange X's. According to this Fourth Amendment, those should have been paid at $1,000 each and not $1,200. But I wasn't sure how it was going to work in the system, if that was going to like do a negative for the landowner, or
no.
Okay, that just stays. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there were, okay, so you're saying, where was I? Seven. Yeah. Okay. Well, right. So, and this is interesting, but here's an example. So this landowner got 2 payments.
Yeah.
In 2024. And part of that was because of that. Right. So, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question, right? So in the first scenario that we were looking at, where with executing amendments, that was the payment was in October for 2024, and then you created a duplicate payment for 2024 executing a second amendment within the same year. But this has actually happened in a lot of the new moon agreements, where this was like, it's a little unclear what the exact, that this amendment wasn't executed until sometime in July, I guess. But the anniversary date is January 23rd.
Yeah, and I think that's because the way that Third Amendment over this past summer was drafted, and I think they got away from that in this most recent iteration, like with the Fourth, so that they said do within X amount of time of the effective date of this amendment instead of relating to the anniversary date.
Yeah, but I think it would have been better to stick. Well, that's what we're looking at here. So this amendment was executed let's say sometime in July, and it's saying, oh, within 60 days of executing the amendment, the landowner's due a payment. But the landowner already received a payment in January. So now the landowner has two payments from the amendment saying, oh, well, you're going to get another payment within 60 days of signing the amendment. But right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, inevitably, you're going to end up with like, I mean, if the anniversary date is January 23rd, if an amendment is signed at any point during 2024, you're going to end up with another, unless it's like the very end
Yeah,
of
because you got the whole year to work
2024.
with.
Right. So there's the
Yeah.
whole year there. It's signed in that window. Now you're going to owe the landowner another payment for 2024 that you already made. So technically you weren't actually due a payment until, and so I see you put it in your screenshot, you're saying, oh, well, was this the 2025 payment?
Yeah, was it just paid super early or and
No,
that's
it
why
wasn't. Right. It was,
Yeah.
well,
Here, I'll drop the agreement language here from that amendment. It says year 6, they reference the extension years as year 6 through 10. And year 6 is supposed to be paid off of the amendment effective date within 45 days. So that's
okay.
that 2025 payment that I marked invalid because that 2025 payment was paid off of the amendment on 9/5/2024.
Hold on.
Yeah, and this was just a big, I mean, that was part of the issue that's now been happening with New Moon is that the amendments, the one like what you just dropped in the chat, Sydney, was, as you know, like not supposed to be written that way. And the development periods of the original EWEDs were supposed to have been considered and not just thought to have been a flat 5 years. So that's what's been creating the issues. And so I know we can't go back in time and change that, but I just want to make sure that what I'm doing from this moment on isn't creating like, well, first of all, isn't like, not giving landowners payments.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think ENGIE still owes the 2025 payment, Sydney. They've said, this language says that they're going to pay the landowner twice in 2024 because they signed an amendment in 2024. But by removing the 2025 payment, the landowner is now not receiving. 2025 is year 7. There's no year 7 payment. Like this amendment was almost written like, it's like.
But then if we pay the 2025, then they're paying not 5 years of payment, that's 6 years of payments.
Yeah, well, there's 2 year 6 payments. The amendment says they're going to make 2 payments in year 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It doesn't say 2 payments in year 6. It specifies year 6 through 7 or 6 through 8
but it says
are paid at that rate, and then year 6 will be paid in accordance with the 45 days.
But they already made.
So it's like they got paid early for year 6 because the amendment was signed and drafted that payment schedule that way. And then I
but
haven't
year
seen
6 is 2025.
There's other fourth amendment, I think Nora attached.
No, but by saying it is expressly understood because the extension is provided here within, initial payment. I see, for year 6 is within. All right, so they're just getting that early. Okay. Yeah. All right, that's fine. Seems unusual.
It's just the timing of the agreement.
Yeah, I just don't understand why. Right, it would have made a lot more sense to just pay them annually. But
yeah, and that's what they definitely are doing with the most recent ones. And I just want to make sure. So before we get off this call, I just want to make sure that I know what start date to put for this fourth amendment.
Right.
10/28.
And so I'll drop the language of that.
So a wrinkle might be that if there was an issue with the terms template that was selected in Radian, it's possible that you would not be able to generate the expected payments regardless of what date that you selected, because it's just the wrong template. But Sydney's tracking that, so
I'm trying to pull up the period so I could take a look. It takes forever to load. 10 to 3 and
I mean, so in this instance, when you're executing this, there's 2025 has already been paid.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking about that the right way.
Right. As I understand it, or as I'm looking at it, 2025 has already been paid. That's right here. They got basically the amendment in 2024 said, oh, we're paying you early for 2025. And so that's here. So when now you're going to execute another amendment. Well, payments are not expected until 2026. So the amendment start amendment payment date for the amendment that you're going to be executing, it needs to be after this anniversary date in 2025. So we'll just keep that open just
and
for
that
reference.
Was
but
my other question was, so I know that the original EWED, the development anniversary date is in this example, January 23rd, 2015.
Yeah.
And so now payments are due within 30 days of that date. So I know that that's why it's now showing like February 22nd.
Right.
And so I just wasn't sure what date to click to do. I do January 23rd, 2026, January 24th, February 22nd, February 23rd, 2026. I just wasn't sure what exact date to put.
I think you would need
to match that one.
That's right. So like if you put in, you need to put a date that's after 2/22/2025. So February 22nd, 2025. You could just do like the end of February. So it's the exact date here doesn't match. It needs to be after this date in 2025. Like if you were, normally you would say, oh, I executed the amendment today. I'm going to start payments today. When you do this, the system's going to say, oh, I need to generate a payment for 2025. And it would be due February 22nd, 2025. So because of this sort of unusual circumstance, you would need to put in 02 February 23rd or 24th, and you could just do as like the next payment is due 2026. So you could even just do, you could do Jan 1, 2026. I don't want payments before, or the end of 2025.
Got it. Okay, so I wasn't
I
sure.
know that payments aren't due until 2026. I'm going to put in this date for, I'm going to do the last day of 2025. I don't want any payments due until 2026. That's what I'm telling the system to do right here.
Got it. Okay, so I guess I just didn't realize that there was so much flexibility and that it wouldn't affect any data or anything to play around with that start amendment payment date.
Right.
As long as you pick, obviously, like within the right range that will generate that.
Right. When you're dealing with annual payments, yeah, it's.
Okay, so then I think to my brain, just because I do want to get back on to track with like thinking of it in terms of anniversary dates, I think probably what I would do, even though I know this isn't the payment due date, it's just the anniversary date, is I would put January 23rd, 2026, and then that would generate a payment due of February 22nd, 2026, right?
I think that should work.
Okay. Do you want me to do it on my end? So, and then we can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And we'll take a look.
Thank you guys so much I know that this has caused a huge, just.
Oh, that's fine.
Brain hurt. I don't even know, headache. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in from executed. Okay. So I already have it attached amendment effective date 10/28/2024. I am superseding. It goes to retain, keeping that all the same. And now I'm changing the start amendment date to January 23rd of 2026. Submit, and then that's where the warning message came up saying extension period and the amendment does not match the superseded agreement.
Right.
You said
so
that was
that's
fine.
Actually, that's right. That's a different, that's a distinct message, which, right, in this instance it is expected because the amendment is explicitly changing your extension data.
Got
So
it. Okay, and by
yeah.
extension data, just so I know, so my brain understands like what that's referring to, is that like the actual length of time, or is it also the payment terms wrapped up in that? Or could it be either or?
That message is saying like you would see that message in an instance where, let's say you had an original and you extended the development term. So by, let's say it was a dev period, a dev term of 7 years and with a 3-year extension.
Mm-hmm.
You trigger you already triggered the extension on the original. Now you're so now you have 10 years of development. Well, let's say that you're in year 8 or 9 and you realize you need even more time for development.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now you maybe don't have any more extensions available on the original. So you need an amendment that's just going to give you more time. Like maybe it's going to increase to, let's say, 15 years development period. Well, the original has an extension that was triggered. You're going to sign an amendment that just has a brand new development term. The system's going to say, oh, your extension data doesn't match because on the original, there was an extension that was triggered. And on the amendment, you don't have an extension that was triggered because you're just changing the duration of the development period. So that's what that message is just showing. Oh, the extension data doesn't match here.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. That makes sense to me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit submit.
Uh-huh.
And still thinking. All right, now I'm going to go to compliance tab and refresh it.
So I'm doing the same thing. I see initially I see a bunch of old payments. The system is still working. Let's see. Clients. Okay. So I actually had to refresh like 2 or 3 times before I got the final thing, but yes, this now looks good. So if you want to share your screen, we could look at that, or I guess I'm sharing so you can see.
No, that matches, and I just refreshed and see that too.
Okay, and so here we see that there is no payment scheduled for 2025, which in this unusual instance is actually expected because as we've noted, and as Sydney very helpfully addressed, the 2025 payment was made early here in 2024. And so we're skipping 2025 entirely. We're going from September 2024 to February 2026 is when the next payment is due. So that one looks good.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. That helps because there's a handful of them that are really old from the 2014, 2015 era that were this exact same scenario. One last question. Thank you guys so much for your time. Sydney, should I be doing anything in terms of like before pushing things through, especially when it comes to new moon, I mean, only when it comes to new moon amendments, to do a scan to make sure that they are the correct template that was selected by the paralegal in Radian, or I just don't want to create more work for you guys, but also don't want to create more work if I'm pushing things through that could have been fixed earlier in the process. I guess that question is for you too, Clay.
Yeah, feel free to jump in, Sydney. But from a workflow perspective, I don't think it's your responsibility, Nora, to be reviewing, the template, the terms template that paralegal selected. The caveat being that I think it is your responsibility as the person who's executing the amendment. You need to at least do a sanity check of the payment obligations that are generated after you execute the amendment.
Yeah, and that's how this issue was caught in the first place, is when I was executing some of those third amendment, or like the amendments that were referring to the extension periods as years like 6, 7, 8, when really they were meaning like 11, 12, 13. That's how this whole thing was caught back in September. So yeah, I definitely feel comfortable doing that, but I completely understand what you say, that just in terms of efficiency and responsibility, that I shouldn't have to be the one doing it. But
it's also in this instance, and I can't recall off the top of my head the details, as Sydney's a little closer to this than I am, but it's the, like, looking at, you can see, so in this one that you just executed, you click on the pen and the pad. And so this is the change request form that Sarah submitted on this date. And on the terms tab, you can see which terms template was selected. And that's here. If that information, like, I don't know if there's necessarily anything that you could do with that information. So I don't know how helpful that is, but you're certainly welcome to take a peek at it. If there was an issue with it, or if it was the wrong one, I'm not sure how you would know that from looking at this. Again, I just think, the key, I think, is that we've had a little bit of discussion with ENGIE over the years about this, but what we've arrived at is that by your responsibility in executing the amendment is you hold some responsibility in validating that the payments were generated correctly. Now, how in depth, do you need to open up the agreement document and look like, oh, does the acreage do all the you could. It's there's a little bit of a question of like how in depth you're going to be looking. Presumably other folks from your team were validating things like the acreage, and paralegal was selecting the correct terms template. At this point, it seems to me like it's more of just generally speaking, it's more of just a sanity check.
Yeah, and just so you're aware, Crystal and I definitely do on intake. So when the documents first come back from the landowners, we definitely are checking the exact acreage and then doing the
right.
calculation ourselves, and making sure
Right.
it's
So that happens at
compliance is right.
intake,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So presumably by at the point of execution, right, that should have already been
Yeah.
looked at, right? Yep, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. You know, in terms of the sanity check, I would say, you know, for in most instances where there's not anything unusual or funny happening, a sanity check would be fine. If you just know that it's more like some kind of more complicated circumstance, then maybe just take a second glance, you know, or just a little
Okay.
bit more of like, okay, does this, you know, in my mind, if we were looking at this and we said, oh, you know, it's like, oh, well, where's the 2025 payment, right? Like at a quick glance, I would just be saying, okay, you know, I'm expecting $1,000 or $1,200 payment every year, and I don't see one for 2025. So, and that's where, you know, having that extra context of like, oh, well, in New Moon, this is an exceptional circumstance. We paid the 2025 payment is getting paid early from the prior amendment type thing. So,
Okay. And then besides, because I don't know if it's part of, I don't think it is part of Kathleen's workflow, but like I know that between land agents, paralegals, and the Crystal and me, the coordinators, that we do look in the landowners tab for notes. And is there a place other than that for me to, if something looks funky, like you just described, like, oh, why isn't there a payment in 2025, to like preemptively put a heads up? Or is that, do you not, is this kind of the only place in the update? Like, yeah, that section that's brought up.
Here, I would say, you know, please feel free to lean on Radian support for, you know, hey, I just executed this. Can you double check that this looks good?
Okay.
And we would be happy to, you know, assist or take a look for you. Or, you know, even if, or there was, I don't know, you said, what, you had like 30 of these that you're going to be executing or something like that? Like, hey, you know, I've got a huge pile of these that I need to execute, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it correctly. Can we get on a call and you show me how to do one or two, and then just make sure I'm doing them the right way or something like that?
Yeah, especially
So,
since so many of them pull from like different eras and have different, like this was such an old one, but not every single one of the amendments that I'm pushing through are like this. They're only on like their first amendment. But yeah, so I
right.
can
Yep.
definitely organize it kind of into scenarios. And if I don't know how to do a certain scenario, reach out to you guys.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds good. You know, either before the fact or after the fact. In either case, you know, we are available and we're happy to assist with anything. It's, you know, it's definitely, even if it's right after you execute something, you know, it's for Kathy to grab that payment and put it into a payment collection, and for that payment to get approved, and then it's going to go out. There's,
Takes
you know,
time.
there is a little bit of a window there for being able to flag things. So, so yeah, you know, I would just say, if you are not confident with what you see happening, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sorry it ended up going on so long, especially with this scenario, but that was really helpful.
Yeah, no, happy to help. I think this is time well spent in terms of reducing, you know, getting ahead of issues. So we're happy to help. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Laura.
Bye.